Hi, everyone. I'm Raymond Benson. Welcome to Hooked on Leiter, an episode by episode unpacking of The Hook in the Eye, my Felix Leiter novel. The folks at Ian Fleming Publications and I had this idea to do behind the scenes videos for each episode, much the same way that streaming television series do after an episode drops. Now, you'll probably all know by now that these were conceived to be supplements to the serialized ebook episodes. But due to some technical difficulties that none of us expected, those ebook file updates just didn't work the way we were led to believe they would. The entire novel was thus released on June 24th. Nevertheless, we decided to go ahead and post these Hooked on Lighter episodes at 2-week intervals over the summer as originally planned. Please note that almost all of them were already recorded before we made the decision to release the entire ebook. So these videos are still very episode centric. We hope you'll receive them now within the context in which they were intended. Again, a warning. If you haven't read the chapters discussed in these videos, there could be some spoilers. So, here we are again. Oh, you might notice that I got a haircut since the last time we met. That must mean we're ready for a road trip. Oh, and look at here. Anyone recognize the name of this restaurant? In my 1998 James Bond novel, The Facts of Death, that version of Felix Leiter takes James Bond to Chewy's restaurant for Tex-Mex down in Austin, Texas. But we're talking about The Hook in the Eye. Episode 4. Um, Episode 4 begins with the road trip across America. I've actually driven the same route between New York and Texas 3 times in my life. Of course, when I did it, the interstate highways had been built, and so the driving was probably much smoother than when Felix drove it. Um, Back then, they were just still U.S. and state highways, probably not as wide, and probably not in good shape since they'd been around probably since the 20s and 30s. But the route would have been the same, going through the same towns and cities. In cases where I could find actual hotels and motels along the way that existed then, I used them. The same is true of the roadside eateries. It was also fun researching what advertisements on billboards would be seen along the way. Ian Fleming liked to point out unusual and amusing road signs and billboards. I think he liked America a lot, but he also found it rather bizarre. I've taken that approach as well, pointing out along the way the more curious aspects of highway travel in the U.S. And my first draft contained a lot more material, a lot of stuff about the food and the motels, and when you're a writer and you start revising and editing, a lot of that stuff ultimately ends up on the cutting room floor because you want the pace. The pace is very important. Um, so yeah, there was a lot of material I left out, but anyway, the romance here begins to develop. Is it one-sided? We're not sure yet. Dora is still a very mysterious lady, and I think that's what attracts Felix to her. Now, the Patricia Neal resemblance was something I picked out of a hat. If you look at pictures of that actress from the early 1950s, she was indeed quite attractive. But there is a bit of an Ian Fleming connection there, too, because Patricia Neal was married to Roald Dahl, who was a friend and wartime colleague of Ian Fleming, as well as a neighbor of Fleming's best friend, Ivor Bryce. Back in 1982, when I was researching the James Bond Bedside Companion, I was staying with Ivor Bryce for a weekend, and he offered to call Roald Dahl and Patricia Neal over for tea so I could meet them because they lived nearby, but they weren't home, so I didn't get to meet them. Anyway, during the trip, we learned that the motorcyclist who tried to shoot them in the last episode was indeed Jan Bartosz, Karl Adamski's old roommate. What's the connection there? Why was he trying to shoot him? Was he aiming at Dora or Felix or both? Then there's Felix's paranoia about that black Buick that he keeps seeing in various places on the trip. Are they really being followed? Is it the same Buick from Manhattan? And then in Roanoke, Virginia, Felix and Dora meet Alec Whitehall, a British man driving a green Studebaker. The guy seems pleasant enough. He shares Felix's enthusiasm for cars and he's on his way south. Will we see him again? Hmm. We also learn more about Dora and Felix, too, as they converse in the car during the trip. Dora tells Felix about her sister, Ava, and her husband, Don Spence, who died shortly after the marriage. Things really get interesting when they get to Knoxville, Tennessee, and they go to a drive-in movie. The Day the Earth Stood Still, one of my favorites. I can't imagine what it would have been like to see that movie in the early 50s, right after it was released. I saw it as a kid in the early 60s, about a decade later. It's still one of the great 1950s science fiction movies. Um, Now, I can't recall the exact sequence of events, but I either chose Patricia Neal as the model for Dora because I'd already picked that movie, or it was the other way around. At any rate, I like this little sequence between Felix and Dora a lot. The next day, their talk is more intimate. More personal background is revealed by both Felix and Dora. Is the heat rising? They stop for lunch in Nashville, Tennessee. Finally, they reach Memphis for the night. I have them stay in a very famous old hotel called the Peabody, and it really is known for having live ducks in their fountain. Um, After the dinner date, I allow Felix some alone time to reminisce a little bit about serving in the Marines, some self reflection. But then there's that knock at the hotel room door. What happens next between Felix and Dora? Is that a game changer? I guess you'll have to wait for the next episode to see. Well, this is Raymond Benson signing off. I'll see you in 2 weeks.